do you set the gains in your installation? I guess you use the DD1, but what do you do when you play the 40 Hz test tone and 1000 Hz test tone on the stereo? Do you use the balancing fader on the stereo, or how to do it?
First off, when you're using a DD1 and you're playing test tones, none of the speakers should be connected. There should be no world in which you play a 0 dB 1000 Hz test tone through your speakers, especially when you're setting your gain. If you want to melt speakers and crossovers and all that stuff, by all means do it. Secondly, this has a factory radio in it. If you don't have an RTA to see what the signal is coming out of the factory radio, you're going to have to be very careful playing a 1000 Hz test tone. A lot of the times manufacturers, in this case, they have EQ'd that factory radio, and if 1000 Hz frequency range is reduced compared to something else, then when you go to set your gains to a reduced frequency, you're going to set your gains too high, because now all these are going to be blasting because you've literally taken everything up. When you're using an aftermarket radio, you have to make sure your EQ is set to flat. Now, you're setting the gains. That's all you're doing. You're not setting your the crossovers are off. They don't exist because there's no speakers connected. All you're trying to do is maximize the output of the amplifier as far as what channels or speakers or whatnot are going to play, because you have a source unit, it's playing a test track going into an amplifier that has no crossover turned on it, and you're adjusting the gain accordingly to match it with the output of the radio. You should have the EQ turned off, the speaker's not connected, and start playing your test tone. The one thing, if you are using a 1000 Hz test tone, you set it at 0 dB is to test where your head unit distorts, and negative 5 dB is the farthest I would go on your mids and highs. If you can't get the power output you want with negative 5 dB, then you're doing it wrong. Now, the other thing you have to consider too, you need a bigger amp. If you're going to EQ up at all, meaning if you want to be able to turn your EQ up, then you better not be using negative 5. You might want to just stay at 0. Because when you're using a reduced test tone like a negative 5, and then you go back into your radio, that means that everything is starting at plus 5. I know it sounds weird, but everything is at plus 5 now. And then if you gain up on your EQ, you're now adding way more distortion into the system than it can handle, and you could have bad things.